Okay, so today we're going to dive into some really fascinating stuff.
Mm.
It's all about how wars are fought and won in the 21st century.
Yeah, it's a wild mix of sources. We've got,
Yeah.
in-depth looks at specific weapons analysis of national security policies
Mhm.
and even some historical parallels.
Yeah, so basically we're looking at military tech, global power struggles, and some pretty insightful stuff
Yeah,
on the evolving landscape of warfare. By
exactly.
the end of this, you're going to understand not just the what, but the why behind all of this.
Yeah, and what it all means for the balance of power.
Exactly. Ready to dive in.
Absolutely, let's do it.
All right, so first up, the F-22 Raptor. Just a year ago, the Air Force was considering retiring this thing.
Right.
Now they're pouring $11 billion into upgrading it. What's the deal?
Well, you can sum it up in one word, China. The Air Force is calling it a reoptimization for competition with China.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not just giving it a new paint job. These upgrades are all about extending the F-22's lifespan and making it relevant in a whole new era of warfare.
So it's not just about keeping up with China's tech, it's about outsmarting them strategically.
Exactly. The F-22's biggest weakness has always been its range, especially in the Pacific, where a conflict with China would most likely happen.
Right.
These upgrades address that head-on. They're getting stealthy external fuel tanks so they can operate further from base and stay in the fight longer.
Okay.
They're also getting new avionics data links, helmet-mounted sights.
Wow.
All that's for bird communication and coordination, especially with the F-35.
So they'll be working together almost like a network.
Exactly, a networked force multiplier.
That sounds pretty intimidating.
Yeah.
But with all this focus on the F-22, is the Air Force neglecting the future? What about the sixth-generation fighter?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's a
Oh,
tough choice between what we need now and what we'll need down the road.
right.
Some people argue that upgrading the F-22 is like souping up an old car.
Yeah,
Yeah, you can make it faster and shinier, but it'll never be a brand new sports car.
I see your point.
They think the money should go to the sixth-generation fighter, which will have the latest tech and leapfrog China's capabilities.
But wouldn't waiting for a sixth-generation fighter leave a gap in our air power? Especially now, when tensions are so high.
That's the other side of the argument. Those who support the F-22 upgrades say we need combat-ready air superiority now, not years from now when the sixth-generation fighter is finally ready.
Yeah.
Plus, there are concerns about whether Lockheed Martin can handle building a new aircraft and how long it'll take.
Right.
They might have to choose between their priorities because of budget constraints. It's a risky gamble.
It really is, and the outcome will definitely affect the balance of power in the Pacific.
For sure.
Now let's talk about those World War II air bases that are getting a second life.
Oh, yeah.
I'm talking about places like Tinian, Paleli, Guam, Saipan.
Those were key spots back in World War II.
They were crucial back then.
Yeah.
It's like we're dusting off an old playbook.
It is?
But it's not just about nostalgia. These islands have the same strategic value today as they did back then.
Absolutely. They provide vital infrastructure for air operations, and they act as a deterrent against aggression, especially when you consider the situation with China and Taiwan.
So it's like history is informing our current strategy.
It shows how geography never really loses its importance in military strategy.
Mm.
These islands are basically unsinkable aircraft carriers. They can project power across huge distances.
That's right.
I mean, there was even a 60-minute segment with the Philippine Defense Secretary warning about China's actions in the South China Sea. They were really focused on how China turned Mischief Reef into a military base, a pretty clear sign of their growing assertiveness in the region.
And considering China's stated goal of being ready to invade Taiwan by 2027, the urgency becomes even more apparent.
Yeah.
The U.S. is investing heavily in upgrading these bases to be ready for potential conflict.
And it's not just about being ready for a fight, it's about preventing one in the first place.
Right.
Like Admiral Lisa Franchetti, the chief of naval operations, said, I like to call it aircraft carriers that don't get underway, but they project power. I mean, no one wants a war, but our number one job is to deter. And we do that by having a combat-credible force that's ready whenever it's called.
So those islands are sending a message to China. We're watching you and we're prepared.
Exactly.
But all of this leads us to Taiwan. This island is a potential trigger for a conflict that could change the world as we know it. What makes it so important?
Well, it's a few things. First, there's the location. Taiwan sits right in the middle of vital shipping lanes, and it's a key part of what's called the First Island Chain. This is basically a chain of islands from Japan to the Philippines that acts as a barrier against China's naval power. If China controlled Taiwan, they'd have a gateway to the Pacific and could project their naval power much further.
So it's like a strategic choke point that could shift the balance of power in the entire region.
Exactly. But it's not just about geography. Taiwan is also a global economic powerhouse, especially when it comes to semiconductors. These chips are in everything from smartphones to fighter jets, and Taiwan is the world's leading producer. If China took control of Taiwan, they'd control this vital industry. It would impact the global economy and could cripple U.S. military capabilities.
So it'd be a disaster economically and militarily if Taiwan fell under China's control. But of course, China has a different perspective. They see Taiwan as a breakaway province that needs to be reunited with the mainland. It's a deeply held belief rooted in their history and their experience of being humiliated by foreign powers in the past.
It's a core part of their national identity and a driving force in their foreign policy. For China, reunifying with Taiwan isn't just about territory. It's about restoring their past greatness and righting those perceived wrongs.
But the U.S. has pledged to defend Taiwan if it's attacked, which puts us in a tricky spot. We don't officially recognize Taiwan as a country, but we provide them with weapons and have a policy of strategic ambiguity when it comes to their defense.
That ambiguity is meant to deter China from doing anything aggressive while giving us some flexibility. It's a tough balancing act.
It really is. And in the middle of all this are the Taiwanese people. Many feel like they're being ignored as the U.S. and China play their power games. They just want to decide their own future without being pressured by either side.
It's a reminder that real people's lives are at stake in all of this. It shows the complexity and the potential cost of this competition between superpowers.
Okay, so we've talked about what's happening in the air and at sea. But there's a quiet revolution happening in ground warfare. Let's talk about the U.S. Army's artillery revolution.
It seems like the war in Ukraine has been a real wake-up call. The effectiveness of artillery in that conflict, over 70% of casualties, is forcing the U.S. Army to rethink things.
So they're realizing that in a serious conflict, air power and precision strikes aren't enough. Sometimes you need good old-fashioned artillery.
Exactly. They did a classified study called the Tactical Fire Study, and the findings are really interesting. Well, they've realized that longer-range artillery is crucial to counter China. They're also moving towards wheeled artillery. It's faster, more maneuverable, and more survivable on a modern battlefield than those tracked vehicles.
Okay.
And to increase firepower and reduce risk to soldiers, they're looking at automation, things like autoloaders and robotic systems.
Wow, so they're completely overhauling their artillery capabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. They're even looking at soft recoil technology, which reduces the force of recoil so much that they can mount cannons on lighter vehicles like Humvees. Can you imagine a Humvee with a cannon? That changes the game completely.
That's some serious firepower.
Yeah.
But what about those smart rounds we've been hearing so much about? Are they really that effective?
Well, it turns out they have a weakness: electronic warfare. They rely on internal electronics for guidance, and the study found they can be jammed or spoofed.
Oh, wow.
Intelligence from Ukraine showed that Russia actually used GPS spoofing to mess with U.S.-supplied Excalibur rounds, making them miss their targets.
So the enemy could hack them and make them backfire.
Yeah. That's the risk. It's a constant back and forth in military tech. So the U.S. Army is developing countermeasures and new tactics to address these vulnerabilities.
I see.
One thing they're focusing on is shoot and scoot, firing a few rounds and then relocating quickly to avoid counter-battery fire. They're also looking at getting a next-generation wheeled artillery system that can move fast-fire quickly and handle the heat of battle.
So it's not just about having the biggest guns anymore.
No, it's about speed, precision, and adaptability.
Makes sense. The battlefield is a complex and constantly changing environment.
Exactly. You have to be able to react quickly, adapt to new threats, and outmaneuver your opponent.
So with all these advances, are towed artillery pieces becoming obsolete?
They're not as important in high-intensity conflicts anymore, but they still have a place in counterinsurgency operations and other situations where mobility isn't as critical. It's all about having the right tool for the job.
Right.
And it's not just about the tech itself, it's about how you use it. That's where SCA comes in, artillery system cooperation activities.
What's SCA? What's that all about?
Think of it like a multinational artillery network. ACA is about coordinating fire missions between allied forces.
So it's like a combined effort.
Exactly. Imagine a German forward observer calling in artillery strikes from the nearest available asset, no matter if it's American, British, or French.
So it's about maximizing firepower by integrating everyone's systems.
Precisely. It creates more flexibility and ensures that the most effective firepower is used against the enemy, regardless of where it comes from.
That's incredible, and it highlights how important international cooperation is in modern warfare.
It's recognizing that in today's world, nations can't face these challenges alone. We need to work together to counter shared threats and maintain stability.
Okay, so we've talked about air power, naval power, and ground power. Now let's look at the bigger picture, U.S. national security policy. How's the U.S. adapting to this new world with a more assertive China and a rapidly changing global landscape?
It's clear that the U.S. is shifting its focus away from counterterrorism and towards deterring conflict with China, especially in the Indo-Pacific. We're seeing big investments in new weapons, a renewed focus on alliances with countries like Japan, South Korea, and Australia, and a real effort to adapt to new threats like cyber warfare and space-based weapons.
But it's not just about military strength.
Hmm.
Our sources suggest that the U.S. is also trying to counter China's economic influence and challenge their authoritarian model by promoting democracy and human rights.
That's right. It's a multi-pronged approach that recognizes that national security is about more than just the military. It's about economic strength, diplomatic engagement, and protecting democratic values.
But there are challenges, right?
Of course there are. For one thing, there's the budget. Balancing defense spending with other national priorities is going to be tough, especially as the U.S. economy faces its own challenges. And then there's the speed of technological advancement. Staying ahead of China in things like AI, quantum computing, and other cutting-edge tech is vital, but it's getting more expensive and complex all the time.
It's a lot to deal with.
It is, and maybe the biggest challenge of all is maintaining public support for a more assertive national security policy. In a democracy, public opinion matters. And convincing the American people that these investments and potential conflicts are necessary to protect their future is a big deal.
Yeah, we can't forget about the ethical questions that come with all these technological advancements.
Right. The use of AI in warfare, the potential for autonomous weapons systems, and the blurring lines between civilian and military technology, all these things raise serious ethical questions.
It's a lot to think about, and we're just getting started. We'll dive deeper into all of this after a short break. We've been talking about how the U.S. is shifting its focus in terms of national security, moving away from counterterrorism and really focusing on China.
Yeah, it's a major shift.
It is, but it seems like it's not just about military hardware, it's about technology too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things we're seeing is AI, artificial intelligence, being integrated into national security.
Right.
It could change everything from intelligence gathering and analysis to decision-making and even combat.
President Biden even signed the first ever national security strategy for AI, which shows how important it's becoming.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
So what's the strategy all about?
It's about making sure the U.S. stays ahead of the game technologically, especially with competition from China and Russia.
Right.
The strategy lays out a whole approach to AI focusing on responsible development, ethical considerations, and mitigating risks, but also using its power to boost our national security.
It sounds like they're trying to walk a fine line.
They are. There are definitely concerns about AI being used in harmful ways, like developing autonomous weapon systems.
I mean, like those killer robots we hear about?
Exactly. That's the kind of thing that raises serious ethical and philosophical questions about the role of humans in warfare and what happens when we give machines too much control.
It sounds pretty scary.
Yeah, it is.
But it seems like the Biden administration is taking those concerns seriously.
They are. They keep emphasizing the need for human oversight and control over AI systems, especially in sensitive areas like national security. They're also focused on using AI to make the military and intelligence agencies more efficient and effective.
How so?
AI can analyze huge amounts of data, find patterns that humans might miss, and predict future threats.
So it's like having a super analyst working around the clock.
Exactly.
But I imagine all this advanced tech is expensive.
Funding is definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
The White House and Congress are actually fighting over the AI budget right now.
Oh, wow.
Some lawmakers are hesitant to spend the money, but the administration says we have to invest heavily in AI to stay ahead.
That's the classic debate between national security and the budget.
It is.
And then there are the regulations that could slow things down.
Right. Finding the right balance between promoting innovation and managing risks is crucial. Too much regulation could stifle the development of AI, giving our rivals an advantage.
Right.
But too little regulation could lead to problems down the road.
So it's a tough balancing act.
It is. Now let's talk about something that hits closer to home, the possibility of national security tools being used against American citizens.
Yeah, it's a sensitive topic, but an important one.
Absolutely. It raises concerns about civil liberties and the balance between security and freedom.
We've seen examples of this with government surveillance programs collecting data on Americans without their knowledge.
It's a complicated issue with no easy solutions. National security agencies need tools to track and stop threats like terrorism and espionage.
Right.
But citizens have a right to privacy and to be free from unreasonable searches.
So where do you draw the line? It seems like a slippery slope.
It is, and that's why strong oversight is crucial to make sure these powers aren't abused and that people's rights are protected.
So checks and balances are key.
Exactly. The courts, Congress, and the public all have a role to play in holding the government accountable.
It's a reminder that we have to be vigilant not just against external threats, but also potential government overreach.
Exactly.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about patriotism. It seems relevant when we're talking about national security.
It does. Patriotism is often seen as a motivating factor for those who serve in the military or intelligence, a love of country and willingness to sacrifice.
Right.
But it's a concept that means different things to different people, and it's often debated, especially in our current political climate.
It seems like everyone has their own definition of what it means to be patriotic.
Exactly. Some people think it means blind loyalty to the government or always supporting military action.
I can see that.
Others see it as a more complex idea based on engaging with the nation's values, holding your country accountable, and working towards a more just society.
And those different views can cause division.
They can. When patriotism becomes about party loyalty, it weakens our society. It prevents us from having real conversations about important issues and finding common ground.
So true patriotism should bring us together.
It should. It should inspire us to work together to make our country better for everyone.
Well said. Now, we've talked a lot about China, but they're not the only player on the global stage. What about Russia?
Russia is still a major threat, even with their setbacks in Ukraine. They have a powerful military, including a lot of nuclear weapons.
Right.
And they've shown they're willing to use force to get what they want, like we've seen in Ukraine and Syria.
And they're active in cyberspace with disinformation and election interference, trying to weaken Western democracies and cause trouble within NATO.
Exactly. They're a threat on multiple fronts, and the U.S. needs to be ready to counter them.
And then there are rising powers like India and Brazil.
Right. They're becoming more influential, they have large populations, growing economies, and they want a bigger role in international affairs.
It seems like we're moving towards a world with multiple centers of power.
That's right. A multipolar world where power is more spread out and no single nation is in charge. It makes things more complex and unpredictable.
With shifting alliances, more competition, and a greater risk of conflict.
Exactly.
So it's more important than ever to stay informed, understand what's happening, and have serious conversations about how the U.S. can navigate this new world.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, and informed citizens are crucial for a democracy.
Okay, let's get back to military technology. We've talked about jets and artillery, but there's another area that's changing rapidly: amphibious warfare.
Oh, yeah. That's all about projecting power from the sea, and the U.S. Marine Corps is at the forefront.
They're always innovating, developing new vehicles, tactics, and strategies.
They have to keep up with the changing nature of warfare.
One of their biggest projects is the Amphibious Combat Vehicle, or ACV.
The ACV, yeah, it's designed to replace the old AAV, which has been around for over 50 years.
Wow.
The ACV is a serious machine, much tougher than the AAV. It has better armor, a stronger suspension, and a V-shaped hull to deflect blasts from mines and IEDs. It's built to survive.
And speed is important in amphibious operations, right?
Absolutely. The ACV is much faster on land. It can go up to 65 miles per hour. It can also move quickly from water to land, so Marines can get from ship to shore fast and surprise the enemy.
And it's well armed.
Oh, yeah. It's got a 30-millimeter cannon, a coaxial machine gun, and it can carry other weapons like anti-tank missiles. It's versatile.
It sounds like the ACV is a key part of the Marine Corps Force Design 2030 plan.
It is. Force Design 2030 is all about creating a more agile and expeditionary force that can operate in tough environments. It's a direct response to the growing threat from China in the Pacific.
So they're moving away from those huge amphibious assaults like in World War II and towards a more spread out approach using speed, mobility, and precision strikes.
Exactly. And the ACV is perfect for this new strategy. It can operate on its own without needing a lot of logistical support, which makes it great for those island hopping campaigns we talked about earlier.
But developing the ACV wasn't easy.
No budget constraints forced the Marine Corps to think outside the box. They ended up adapting a design from an Italian company, Iveco, and modified it to fit their needs. It saved time and money and shows the value of international cooperation in military tech.
So the ACV could play a big role in a potential conflict with China over Taiwan.
Definitely, our sources suggest it could be used to transport Marines to those small islands around the Philippines and Taiwan, creating a network of mobile units that could disrupt Chinese forces.
It's a fascinating look at the future of amphibious warfare, fast, flexible, and deadly.
It shows how warfare is always evolving, driven by technology and the need to adapt to new threats and realities.
But with all this talk about technology and strategy, we can't forget the human cost of war.
Absolutely. War is a terrible thing, a last resort. We should only consider it after all other options have failed.
And even during conflict, we have to keep striving for peace and look for diplomatic solutions.
We can't forget the human toll, the lives lost, the families torn apart, and the scars that last long after the fighting stops.
Okay, let's take a step back and think about what we've learned so far.
We've explored the latest in military tech, from hypersonic missiles to AI-powered systems, and we've looked at how these technologies are shifting the global balance of power.
We've seen how the U.S. is adapting to a more powerful China, investing in cutting-edge technology, strengthening alliances, and rethinking old strategies for a new era of competition.
And we've seen how other countries are responding, from Russia's actions in Ukraine to the growing influence of emerging powers like India and Brazil.
It's a complex and ever-changing situation,
It is. One of the clearest trends is the emergence of a multipolar world where power is more spread out and no single nation is in control.
which leads to more competition, more complex alliances, and a higher chance of conflict.
Exactly. The race for technological dominance is also heating up, with AI and other advanced technologies playing a bigger role in warfare and national security.
And the way wars are fought is changing, with a focus on speed, agility, precision strikes, and the ability to operate in multiple domains: lands, sea, airspace, and cyberspace.
It's a new era of warfare with higher stakes than ever before.
But it's not just about the military. National security also involves economic strength, diplomatic engagement, and protecting democratic values.
Right. And the U.S. is facing challenges on all those fronts, from budget problems to a decline in trust in government institutions.
It's a tough situation, but we have to navigate it for the future of our nation.
And we need everyone to be involved. National security isn't just the government's job, it's everyone's job. We need to stay informed, be engaged, and be willing to have tough conversations about the choices we face.
Now let's talk about the ethical questions that come with these technological advances. This is where things get really interesting, and we'll explore that in our final segment. We've been talking about a lot of complex issues: the rise of China, the changing nature of warfare, and the challenges facing the U.S. in terms of national security. But as we've gone deeper, we've uncovered some even more fundamental questions, especially when it comes to the rapid advancements in military technology.
Technology is often a double-edged sword, and these advancements in artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, and cyber warfare, they all have the potential to change the battlefield in ways we're only just starting to understand.
Exactly. And that brings us to some really important ethical questions that we as a society need to address. We've touched on the idea of killer robots, those autonomous weapon systems that can decide who lives or dies without any human involvement. Sounds like something out of science fiction, but it's becoming a reality.
It is, and it raises really big questions about who's responsible control and the very nature of war. If a machine makes a mistake, who's to blame? How can we make sure these systems follow the laws of war and human rights? These are questions that everyone needs to think about: technologists, ethicists, policymakers, and the public.
It's not a conversation we can just ignore. We're talking about the future of war and the possibility of unintended consequences that could get out of control.
Absolutely.
But it's not just about autonomous weapons. The increasing use of AI in military decision-making raises concerns about bias, transparency, and the potential for these systems to make human errors even worse.
You're right. We have to be extremely careful about giving machines too much control, especially when it comes to war and peace. Human judgment, empathy, and moral reasoning are things that algorithms can't replicate.
And it's not just about the ethics of using these technologies. It's also about how they could change the nature of conflict itself.
Yeah.
If wars become more automated, fought by machines instead of humans, does that make them more or less likely to happen? Will it make it easier for leaders to start wars?
That's a critical question. Some people think autonomous weapons could make wars more precise, with fewer civilian casualties and less collateral damage.
That makes sense.
Others worry that these systems could actually make conflict more likely because they create a sense of detachment. It might become easier for leaders to launch attacks without thinking about the consequences.
That's a scary thought. And this leads us to another question that's been hanging over everything we've discussed. Is military strength enough to guarantee national security in the 21st century?
It's a question that's getting harder and harder to answer. The world is facing so many complex challenges: climate change, pandemics, resource scarcity, cyber threats, and a global economy that's interconnected and fragile. Military power alone just isn't enough to deal with all of that.
It seems like our whole idea of what national security means is changing. It used to be all about military power and defending our territory.
Exactly. We're moving towards a broader understanding of security that includes economic resilience, social cohesion, environmental sustainability, and the ability to adapt to rapid technological change.
So it's not just about building weapons and sending troops. It's about investing in education infrastructure, public health, and diplomacy.
Yes, it's about working with other countries to tackle shared challenges.
It's about recognizing that true security comes not just from military strength, but from creating a world that is more fair, sustainable, and where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. And this brings us to our final question, maybe the toughest one of all. What role should America play in this rapidly changing world? For a long time, the U.S. has been the most powerful country, shaping the international order and getting involved in conflicts all over the world.
Right, but is that role still possible in the 21st century? With China and other powers rising, is it time for the U.S. to rethink its global strategy and work more collaboratively with others?
Should we focus on building partnerships, strengthening alliances, and working together to solve those global problems we've been talking about? Or should we keep acting alone, asserting our military power, and putting our own interests first, even if it hurts others?
These are big questions that we as a nation need to answer. There are no easy answers, and there will be tough choices to make.
But one thing is for sure, the decisions we make today will have a huge impact on the future, not just for America, but for the whole world.
So let's have these discussions with open minds, think carefully, and be willing to listen to different points of view.
The future isn't set in stone. It's something we create together through our choices and actions.
So let's choose wisely. Let's act with courage, compassion, and a commitment to building a better world for everyone.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's giving you some new insights and things to think about. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep pushing the boundaries of what you know.